Kia ora. This is a critique of a News Hub report headed "Rising Racism and White Supremacy in New Zealand, Forcing Changes to Basic Māori Tikanga." It begins, iwi leaders say racism and white supremacy are on the rise in this country and forcing changes to basic Māori tikanga. This appears to be very close to a direct quote from Professor Margaret Mutu, who features later on in the video. But not all Māori are in agreement. As one commentator put it, our tikanga belongs to us. It cannot be fused, changed or taken away from us, says Tui Piripi. To ensure I understood her correctly, I asked Tui, so I take it you disagree with Professor Margaret Mutu, who said they're having to change tikanga? The response was, most definitely, our tikanga are our traditions, our values, our customs handed down through whakapapa since the beginning of time. These are sacred taonga whakaaro that belong to us. Iwi leaders are a government construct. They do not speak for ngā hapu katoa. Tui Piripi. The article reports that the Human Rights Commission is being enlisted to lobby the government to commit to a process that would help eliminate racism, end quote. With that in view, let's take a brief survey of the leaders of the Human Rights Commission. Chief Human Rights Commissioner Paul Hunt, a public servant, a bureaucrat, is on public record recently as citing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission report on apartheid from South Africa, comparing it to conditions present in New Zealand at this time. Here's what David Seymour, ACT Party leader, who has a Māori heritage, responded to Hunt's comments. Chief Human Rights Commissioner Paul Hunt's comments this morning about white supremacy and co-governance show he is unfit for office and reinforces the need to abolish the left-wing Human Rights Commission. He continues, Hunt's claim that white supremacy and institutional racism are woven into the fabric of New Zealand is untrue, needlessly divisive, and does more harm than good. Hunt also appears to believe co-governance is a human right promised by the treaty. Article 3 of the treaty promises equal rights and duties. The Commission has become irrelevant and even dangerous. It has become a highly politicised left-wing organisation, and when it comes to actually helping people with human rights, it doesn't help at all. David Seymour, MP. There has since been a call for Hunt's resignation. The Honourable Kiri Allan, Minister of Justice, has ministerial oversight of the Human Rights Commission. Kiri Allan has Māori heritage, which raises a question mark, as Minister for Justice, just how neutral and impartial she is in regards to justice where it concerns her own people. The symbol of justice is a blindfolded female statuette holding up a set of scales for public scrutiny. The blindfold represents impartiality, a difficult thing when so many judicial issues are implicated, when the Treaty of Waitangi has become so entwined in government protocols. Allan has vowed, I will be making announcements on hate speech by the end of this year. That was 2022. Left-leaning daily blogger Martin Badbury predicts Kiri Allan's hate speech laws will be the political kiss of death to Labour. Though the proposed changes have largely been defanged because of the backlash, it is still a live issue. There has been much political mileage made in the past 2 years out of the free speech debate, and Allan is in the thick of it. Part of the fallout from this is the appearance of the Disinformation Project, touted as an independent research body. But again, questions abound of the veracity of that claim of independence, given the stark reality of homogeneity of thought between academics, leftist politicians, and mainstream media, who so ardently defend the indefensible claim that Māori didn't cede sovereignty in the Treaty of Waitangi. A huge question remains of whether the attempt at curbing rights to free speech, which according to the Human Rights Commission mandate they should be defending, will translate into banning political and social opposition to Māori claims of sovereignty and other leftist projects. In an ominous development that threatened to eclipse other conspiracies, the so-called Independent Disinformation Project sought to collude privately with mainstream or legacy media in a series of meetings in Auckland and Wellington. Quote, "A series of private briefings for journalists on political disinformation in New Zealand had to be cancelled amid safety concerns." Kate Hanna, director of the non-government research group, the Disinformation Project, said efforts to attend by those not invited and a security breach led to the decision to call off the seminars. That's by Mark Dolder of Newsroom. Let me translate from that newspeak to plain English. Their plans of collusion to censor or influence political opposition in the lead-up to an election were thwarted by being made public. Where then is that celebrated obligation of the Fourth Estate to be independent, to be the watchman on behalf of the people, to balance the overwhelming power of the state? Let me remind the reader that this sort of political interference borders on sedition. At this point, I'm not suggesting I know of any direct link between Allen and these developments, but the narrative surrounding the push for free speech infringements on human rights, a fundamental imperative of democracy, is a common theme of both the political machinations of this government, our sole source of truth, and a complicit and fawning media. To return to the News Hub report in question, quote, "Waitangi is the place where a founding document of this country was signed, the Treaty of Waitangi, a document of a partnership. But 180 years later, Māori don't feel equal." End quote. But a duly elected, that is, a democratically elected MP of Māori heritage disagrees, and so do many accredited academics. Māori were party to the treaty, yes, but not partners in the sense that is commonly attributed to their participation. To repeat ACT leader David Seymour, Hunt also appears to believe co-governance is a human right promised by the treaty. Article 3 of the treaty promises equal rights and duties. Equal rights with British subjects, I might add. Promoters of co-governance appear to interpret the treaty as a right to co-govern, which is antithetic to the third article of the Treaty of Waitangi. And I quote that third article: "In consideration thereof, Her Majesty the Queen of England extends to the natives of New Zealand her royal protection and imparts to them all the rights and privileges of British subjects." This clearly establishes the relationship of Māori to the Crown. Māori would not be co-governors equal to the Crown over existing British subjects. But of course, equality is there. It denotes equality with existing British subjects. As descendants of these British subjects of that time, and having a cultural inheritance from that relationship, an unbroken chain of relationship extending for hundreds of years, That qualifies the ordinary citizen of New Zealand, and of course Māori and their ancestors, who have also lived within the bounds of that relationship for over 180 years. It qualifies us to interpret that relationship. And it is not co-governance of the Crown with Māori over British subjects, but it is co-governance in the sense that with the subsequent development of democracy within New Zealand, coupled with the Crown relinquishing direct control of New Zealand and passing on these powers to a duly elected cooperative and representative form of government. In this sense alone, Māori and all others of various cultural and ethnic histories form a self-governing cooperative body. As to the second part of that sentence from this newspaper item, as to the second part of that sentence, but, and I quote, but 100 years later Māori don't feel equal, quote, end quote. This reflects a regressive change to a culture that has recognised for a long time that feelings are not always a reliable indicator of reality. It is frequently heard on any side of the political spectrum slogans like, "Our policies are evidence-based," in contradistinction to how people feel. On the other hand, it may be argued that this is a genuine sense reflecting a real disaffection with representative politics. The model of democracy that has held sway for a long time. In that sense, the feelings are in fact the result of a real disenfranchisement where groups have actually lost their voice and where their so-called representatives in Parliament no longer reflect the will or the desires of the people. This disaffection, though, is not the sole property of Māori, but is a reflection of a serious disjunction between the political world and the lot of the average voter across the voter spectrum. Māori feel that iwi leaders don't represent them. Grassroots voters of various persuasions feel that their voice is drowned in the clamour for influence by their representatives in Parliament. Those who are great at wooing the voter and then, having gained a seat in the corridors of power, immediately follow their own agenda. But let's not conflate the issue. Not feeling equal is not an indication of systemic racism. I don't deny that racism exists, which no doubt contributes to that feeling. But it is another thing again to say that racism is embedded systemically in our laws, statutes, our constitution. That is patently absurd, and the attempt to frame this in light of a founding document, the treaty, is even less believable. Because it was there 183 years ago that equality was assured and has been continually developed ever since. And our history witnesses to that. Hence the Māori franchise enabled by dropping the prerequisite of owning land. Māori women got that vote when all women were granted the vote. No other group of any description are guaranteed representation in Parliament that Māori enjoy, courtesy of the Māori seats. MMP has also seen a huge increase in the power of minorities to exercise their will through this cooperative structure. Māori are currently overrepresented in the running of this country in terms of their proportion of the population. And Māori are constantly in the news, exercising political muscle, and mainstream media are now paid to promote Māori interests by the government, and is even evident in the article I am now critiquing, where it is proudly announced that this article is produced by the Public Interest Journalism Fund, which is Politico's newspeak for you, the taxpayer, are funding your own indoctrination. Whose public interest, might well be asked? Certainly not the overwhelming majority who are not Māori. And it begs the question, can divisive identity politics paid for by the public ever be in the public interest? It has proved not so in many countries, which have fractured and disintegrated with the promotion of these same ethnic and racially based policies. Africa is littered with such, and do we really want to go down that track?